among most of animals than we know. It's male members who put on masquerade, Animals have colored nice feathers and so on to attract the woman. But then with humans, uniquely, it changes. It's the women, feminine sex, who has to mask themselves to attract men. Now I totally accept something third will emerge and so on. But I like much more this idea that language is not, as some Habermasians or modern rationalists think, originally a medium of communication, collaboration, thinking, which then gets distorted with all this sexualized or manipulative game. Note that language is, at its most basic dimension, an instrument of life.
Hello, this is Robinson Earhart, here with the introduction to Robinson's podcast number 213. And this episode is with the Slovenian menace Slavoj Žižek. This is his fourth time on the show. The first go-around, we talked about psychoanalysis. Then we did joint episodes on quantum mechanics with Sean Carroll and Lee Smolin, respectively. And this time we cover Slavoj's views on why we need philosophy today more than ever before. We talk, or Slavoj talks, and I listen very happily about God, Marxism, ancient philosophy, the origins of language, quantum mechanics, and also, as usual, more than I could possibly list. Other things to mention are I am still fiending for a 5-star average review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Spotify is a black box. I have no idea how many more reviews I need for that, but with Apple, I think I need 20 more 5-star reviews to get that 5-star average, so please help me out. There is also a Patreon if you would like to join, and there are going to be monthly AMA episodes, but more importantly, there is a link to an ad-free RSS feed as well as show notes. And now, without any further ado, I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with Slavoj. Slavoj, today, you wanted to talk about why philosophy is more important in our daily lives now than ever.
Because I think that the crisis we are approaching, not even approaching, in which we are now, is not just the crisis of empirical phenomena like global warming, will there be war, immigrants, whatever, but it's what? I remember Christa Wolf, she died now, an East German writer, a half dissident. Her most famous novel is Geteilte Himmel, The Divided Heaven, where a hero in her novel has a debate with a West German person, and the West German person says, okay, we have our conflicts, but still we are under the same heaven, And the narrator says on her behalf, no, even the heaven is divided. Like, we don't even share the terms of the debate, not just in this superficial sense. Like, you talk about ecology, and different people will give you, this is elementary, will give you a totally different view of ecology. Like, again, for some people, radical pessimists, it's humanity as such, which is responsible. For some people, it's capitalism, this profiteering, the logic of self-reproduction, increasing value, which a priori ignores the consequences for environment. Then you have simple socialists or even state ecologists, and I'm getting closer and closer to them almost, who say it's too easy to claim let the market take care of it. Just raise the taxes on those products which hurt the environment. I think that there will be catastrophes or different. We will have it with different situations. We will have to act much faster. So I'm saying that the problems that we are encountering today, they more and more demand of us, even if we ignore this dimension, to act like philosophers, And in what sense? For example, we have now debates about artificial intelligence. But even to participate in this debate, you have to make some decisions which are so fundamental that they have to be qualified as philosophical. Like, what is freedom? Are we free? In what sense does artificial intelligence constrain our freedom? What do you mean by freedom? I know, for example, many people who are in their scientific outlook fully determinist materialists. And they say, when we talk about social freedoms, this has nothing to do with this philosophical aspect, like, in my brain, am I really free when I act, where I say something? They will say, it may be totally determined there, but freedom simply means the subjective feeling of freedom. But I agree with those who claim that with today's, not only artificial intelligence, but also new options to control our mind, to interact directly with our mind, the two dimensions interact. That is to say, the question, can our mind be mechanically controlled? Do we really have a free will? It's not just an abstract theoretical question. It has consequences for our social life and so on, because new forms of power, domination, control, and so on act already at this level, which we thought doesn't concern our everyday life, so that I don't get lost. What I'm saying is that the problems, big problems that confront us today, don't they compel us to reflect on the very basic terms that we use, especially terms which we use to diagnose our situation or to explain based on what is our criticism. Like when I said technology is constraining our freedom, my immediate reaction is, okay, what do you mean by freedom? And so on and so on. So here, I think, philosophy is needed. Even, maybe I already mentioned this at some of your previous shows with you, even let's take a debate which is now everywhere going around, abortion. But isn't it that to have a position on abortion, you must make, look, I'm not saying these are philosophical decisions, but nonetheless, you have to take a certain fundamental stance. Is the fetus a living being? Is somebody being hurt when you do abortion? Because you know what fascinated me? I remember already years ago, some guys were defending the prohibition on abortion in a very logical way. I almost like it, although I'm opposed to it. They simply put prohibition of abortion into the series of big progress on human rights and human freedoms. They claimed, listen, it began with fighting racism. All races should have the same rights and so on. Then there was the feminist struggle. Women should be treated in their social activity as equal to men and so on. Then we have sexual liberation struggle, LGBTQ and so on and so on. And what they are saying is, for us, the fight against abortion is simply the next step in this struggle. Each stage of this struggle included some group previously excluded. other races? No, they should be also included. Women, no, they should be also included. So-called transsexuals, no, they should be also included. And they're claiming, we just want to say that the unborn people, they should also be included. Now, I think it's too simple to go directly into, how should I call it, into this empirical debate, you know. You analyze the fetus, you say, sorry, up to that week, the fetus even doesn't yet have the organs of sensitivity developed, so he cannot feel anything. No, there are, again, it's not just a scientific question. We have to assume a fundamental statement. So what do we have to do today? And here I found a nice solution reading a recent book on the history of philosophy. I think the thing we have to do is to return to Socrates, you know, the first one, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. You know why? Socrates is known, what? For his statement of the only thing I really know is that I don't know anything, that I know nothing, and his constant questioning. But I think this was an attitude that we need more than ever today. I put it like this. Socrates broke not only with the pre-philosophical cosmologies, you know, where you immediately speculate about what the universe is. Usually you get some sexualized duality, like lightness and dark, masculine and feminine principle, whatever. Okay, with philosophy, this is over. But nonetheless, up to Socrates, philosophy was still in some sense similar to these pre-philosophical speculations. They took, the first philosophers, a kind of a panoramic view of all of reality and proposed some first founding principle or ground. For example, the one who is usually counted as the first philosopher, Thales. His idea was everything is water. Water is the ground of everything. And this is a very revolutionary statement at that time. You know why? Because it goes against the standard pre-philosophical cosmology stance, which is the earth. You know, we all are on the earth as unmoved foundation of our life. No, he said water, which already means dynamic, borderless, and so on. But okay, Thales. Then we get Heraclitus, you know, whose point is change, constant change, struggle, and so on. Then Democritus, atoms, and so on. But what I'm saying is that all of them were simply posing some fundamental principle of all reality. They were critical in some formal sense. Their solution contradicted other solutions. But it was still as if from some empty place, external position, we can take into our view all of reality, cosmos, and speculate about what our reality is at the most elementary level. With Socrates, things take a totally different turn. First, we should not forget, here I see the actuality of Socrates. We should not forget that he came in a moment of political crisis. The Greek traditional way of life, as embodied in polis, city-state, Athens, and so on, was in decay, was in the process of disintegration. So for Socrates, his position was a direct reaction to this social crisis. But what was his solution? It wasn't so much a new positive principle. It was very interesting. It was a radical questioning. Also, you can say self-questioning. Like, you know, what's so interested in, at least early, what we know. We only know Socrates, of course, from Plato. early and middle Plato's dialogues, Socrates does something which I claim is radically new in the entire history of humanity. She just asks questions about basically the meaning of the words. Like, I think in his early dialogues, they're typically about, okay, beauty. But what is beauty? Tell me. He probes into his opponent or partner. Tell me, what do you mean by beauty? Tell me, what do you mean by courage? Tell me, what do you mean by knowledge? Tell me, what do you mean by justice? And it doesn't matter that she doesn't arrive in the early dialogues. They end in confusion. She doesn't arrive at a simple solution. It's just this radical uncertainty. We don't know what words mean. And the beginning is to clarify this. And now I don't have time. People will get bored to go deeper into it. But the beautiful paradox of Socrates, at least as we know him from Plato, is that it's not that she begins with this and then she gets, of course, at eternal ideas as unchangeable forms, so that our common material reality is always changing, but it's a copy of eternal universe of ideas. No, she doubts even about this. She would have asked, okay, but what do you mean by idea? Okay, and so on. And here, for me, the greatest dialogue is Parmenides of Plato, which ends up in a total mess. It's a series of questioning of this, what is being, what is one, and so on. And again, it ends up in a total mess. And after that, Plato kind of retreats, steps back. But what is so important here? First, that for the first time, philosophy, and this is philosophy in the only serious sense, is directly presented as a reflection of the social crisis in which we are. And the idea of philosophy is that instead of directly proposing a solution, you risk this, it's not a good word, but let's say, you risk reducing yourself to this absolute zero of I'm a nobody, I know nothing, and so on. And then you hope that through this radical contraction, I'm just who I am, what do I know, what is out reality, and so on, you will get at some new universality. And why I think here Socrates is unique? Because a Chinese friend immediately answered me, but wait a minute, Confucianism, doesn't it do the same? Confucius also wrote in his Analytics, we live in a time of a crisis, and even goes a step further in a Socratic way and says the origin of crisis is that we no longer use words in their proper meaning. One guy means one thing, another thing, it's a mess. But Confucius then nonetheless tries simply to return to the tradition. His hope is that let's stabilize the basic meaning of words and let's act properly. So let's bring back the old traditional stability. While with Socrates, it doesn't function. The idea is that you should risk a total self-loss, a reduction to almost nothing. There are even sometimes excremental metaphors used. To get really close to God, first I have to reduce myself to pure shit, as it were. And I claim, if I may refer to my last book, Christian Atheism, that there is something of this same logic in Christianity. We have, okay, God, all that, blah, blah. But then we have Christ, which is the reduction of all divinity to a single poor man dying there, despised as a beggar almost on the cross. And only by passing through this serious point, what happens? No, we don't return to the old traditional security, but safe traditional position, but something much more interesting happens. A new universality emerges, which is, of course, called Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit, which is, again, not the same as the old traditional divine principles or whatever. It's just the egalitarian universality of individuals who are in principle equal. And it's incredible because, you know, better than me maybe, that Plato is often dismissed as the proto-totalitarian, you know, like with Karl Popper already. From Plato to Hegel and Marx, closed society totalitarians. Against Plato is usually opposed to Aristotle, who was more empirical, more open, and so on. But no, Plato was fully egalitarian. In one of his earlier dialogues, Meno, to clarify a mathematical point, of course it's a fake, but it's an interesting, productive fake, in a dialogue, not reality, she brings in Socrates when he debates his partners, I don't know who they are. He calls an ordinary slave who sits next to him and proves how a slave also can comprehend this difficult mathematical point. So you have again this universal self-doubt, principal egalitarianism, all traditional hierarchies are suspended, and then a new, much more emancipatory universality emerges. I think that Socrates is a real beginning here. And I think, again, that we are today in such a mess that we cannot simply rely on some old traditional cultural element like, okay, let's return to the origins of Christianity or whatever, or even science today and so on. This is what I would like to, how do they say it, for a rough investigation in American police procedural movies and novels. I don't want to give him a third degree in this sense of brutal questioning. I just want to confront him with these absolutely basic questions. Like today, we all act on which are our basic notions: human rights, happiness, freedom, justice, and so on. And I think our first approach should be Socratic here. We cannot simply rely on, we are for freedom, human rights, democracy, so we know who are the bad guys. No, these terms are so abused today, all of these terms, freedom, equality, whatever, that we have to begin by this critical turn on the words themselves that we use. It's not a kind of a linguistic solipsism. It's just that we have to vacillate, to destabilize the basic frame, ideological frame of how we understand, approach reality. And I'm not now saying that we should just do a pure philosophical speculation. No, I think that often here, even empirical inquiries and tests can be very productive. In one of my previous books, I report on how I find, old senile, I forgot the title and the author, but I read a wonderful book where an empirical sociologist did an experiment, which is for me a true empirically demonstrated rejection of the basic premises of our capitalist worldview. You know, that people are basically egotists, that there is no natural, here I agree with them, sense of solidarity and so on. No, but there is something else. This guy reports first of an experiment done in I forgot which one, is it even MIT or where, top scientific laboratory. It's a wonderful experiment. It makes me cry still in my heart, a deep communist, This was the experiment. They manipulated, probably without telling them, a group of top researchers. And then they were raising their salaries and observed the effects. What was the shock? When they were really paid low, not enough to live safely, they, of course, worked better if you paid them more. But only up to a certain point. The presupposition here is, of course, that these were people who really enjoyed their works, like researcher whose work, scientific research, was, and I use this term with all pathetic magnitude, it's a vocation. Your job, like if I may put it in theological terms, your job is not just something you do for money to survive. Your job is your vocation, in the sense that you didn't just choose your job. In some sense, you were chosen, like if you are really a great philosopher or scientist or artist, you didn't simply decide, I want to be this. No, all of a sudden you discovered, I'm chosen, like as if addressed, I cannot not do this. So what he discovered, I already hinted it, is that if then you raise the salaries of these researchers even more, they get so obsessed by money that if the wages, or whatever they earn, maybe the term wages is not enough here, the quality of their work lowers. Because when they get so much money, they get corrupted by money. They say, okay, it's interesting what I'm working, but my God, I could buy another house, go to a holiday from a blah, blah, blah. And again, the quality falls down. So I find this a wonderful thing of how there is no simple correlation between how well you are paid and what you are, and the quality of what you are doing. We have a certain standard. We want to, of course, live a nice life, but not a life of luxury. You just want to be free to do what you feel is your vocation. And did I already mention the last time we were here? Then I found a place where they are all communists in this sense. Interrupt me or cut me out if I already mentioned it. Now my favorite place, newly discovered in the world, which is, it's not the smallest, but it's maybe the smallest inhabited island, which is really alone. Like the nearest inhabited islands from this island is St. Helena, where Napoleon was imprisoned. It's over 1,000 miles away. It's in southern Atlantic, Tristan da Cunha. You know how people there live? Check it on Wikipedia or what. It's a small island, no airport, just a boat reaches it maybe once, twice a month. And around 200, 60, 70 people live there. Modest but nice life. They don't own any land. It's collectively owned just at the beginning of each season. They said you will work this part, that part, they help each other and so on. They have very little contact with outside world. And this is happening today. Now you will say, of course, they must be idiots isolated there. Now comes the true wonder. In the year 1961, I think, there was some earthquake or volcanic eruption, whatever there. So the British government, and the island is under their protection, moved all the people for 2 years back to England. And then after 2 years, the situation got normalized. Now comes the shock. You know that except 2 people who there fell in love, were seduced by city life, all of them returned. They were returned to Tristan da Cunha. They were so identified by this. Then, I think it's not too obscene, or out of respect for my good friend who had this terrible accident, maybe you heard it, Hanif Kureishi, who is now, and it looks as if he will remain this basically half vegetable till his death. And he made a pleasant discovery. In this, there are many nurses who serve you there, but I'm not talking in sexual sense here. Most of them are men and so on. But I don't want to be caught in that. But what I want to say is that she noticed something. They are low paid, much less than the big doctors who come to see them, when you are in these rehabilitation centers, And it's horrible to be a vegetable, It's not only they feed you, but each morning and evening, they turn on your stomach and with fingers go into your ass, try to see if some shit will come out and so on. But he discovered, Hanif, you don't know, he made a couple of movies which were quite a triumph, wrote scenario for them. Okay, what I want to say is that he discovered that for these people, even if they were lowly paid, and now I'm not talking about some extravagant small Atlantic islands. I'm talking about big hospitals or rehabilitation centers in the suburb of London. He noticed how, in contrast to doctors, high specialists, who are the usual corrupted bullshit, care about money, ignore you, and so on. These lowly paid helpers, carers, those who care of you at this everyday level, because Hanif now, he cannot even eat alone, and so on, That nonetheless, they complain about not getting enough money, but they never, what Hanif writes in his memoirs of this year that he spent there, that he asked them, well then, okay, why don't you leave your job if it's so low paid and go somewhere else? And all of them gave him, they were not coordinated, the same spontaneous answer. But I'm here to do this. That's my vocation. I have no moral right to abandon you here, So, I don't buy this eternal argument, that we are much more corrupted than we think, socialism is a utopia, and so on. No, these are elements of a surprising solidarity which totally violates this profit market-oriented behavior. These people knew they are exploited, but since they are doing it in immediate contact with their patient, and they developed not a personal connection, but this type of, my God, I see suffering, I cannot just go away. I think that if our societies, with all crazy problems that we have, if our societies are to survive, we will have to move along these lines. Rediscover this work as a vocation and this spontaneous dedication. Like, okay, I don't earn enough, I complain, blah, blah, but I have no choice. I was chosen, as it were, to do this. I think, just imagine, people do act like this when you get big catastrophes. I don't idealize Ukraine, but I have some friends there, and they even feel a little bit oppressed with the present Zelensky government for making too much compromise with Western powers and so on. But I have some friends there and some French journalists who visited them as well. That city which is now almost under siege, Kharkiv, the second biggest city. My friend, a big Slovene journalist, we are good friends, went there 2 weeks ago. And wrote for a Slovene leftist weekly journal a wonderful text where he discovers how these people are not involved. He's talking about everyday people. He's talking about people who learned how to survive when, every day 1 or 2 bombs fall here on there in Kharkiv. But they somehow manage to organize their life. It becomes part of the life, that with radars and so on, they discover that some drones or whatever are approaching. You're told, okay, go quickly into some basement or what, and so on. But nonetheless, the social life go on, and ordinary people bring food to soldiers. I was quite fascinated by all this. So this would be my answer to those who claim, socialism is a utopia. No, people are at this. No, now I will be more skeptical. People are at the same time better and worse, I claim, than this image of egotists. First, people are worse in the sense of, as already Jean-Jacques Rousseau saw, egotism in itself is not a bad thing. Egotism means I care of myself, I want to take care of blah, blah. But if you're a rational egotist, not in any pathetic sense, but rational, you soon discover that collaborating with others is profitable even to your self-interest. No, the problem is when logic of envy enters. When, as they say, this is one of the big sayings of capitalism, it's only that I have to win, the other has to lose also, And then the next step is that it's more important that the other loses than for me to win. But there is nothing natural in this, because it's incredible when you are in a state of emergency, war, and so on. People who before in their daily life were corrupted, opportunists, and so on, they all of a sudden do incredible things. Not in a pathetic way, like, I want to be a hero, but simply like shells or to enter a building which is under fire to save somebody, or when the building is collapsing. Yes, it has to be done. You are there, you hear the shouts from outside, it has to be done. So this is how, in the direction in which I would have moved as a Socrates figure today. I think that this idea that socialism is too naive, that people are egotists, full of envy and so on, is simply not the whole truth. People are, if I may paraphrase Freud, people are much worse than they think, much more evil, and at the same time, much better than they believe. This is one of the most fascinating ethical moments, how this is the moral stories from everyday life that I like to hear, how ordinary people, corrupted opportunists, then there is an emergency situation and you don't know why, click, they become ultra-ethical. Not in this pathetic way, I'm ethical, but they simply do things that have to be done. And here I see some hope. I'm not a total pessimist, but it was a long way, my God. Again, maybe I already used this joke with you. Again, the joke, from Slovenia, where the joke was circulating already for years. How do you make a 1 hour interview with me so that you ask me one question? So I came pretty close to that. So let me leave you some time to move maybe the direction of our interview into where you want.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot on the table now, but I'd like to focus on this underlying through line that we need to think like philosophers, because philosophers themselves have very, very different ideas of what philosophical thinking is or what the practice of philosophy should be like. So analytic philosophers...
Only philosopher. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's why I would like to talk with Lee Smolin, with others, because people who say this, usually say, this is philosophy. Every idiot can deploy his view. But sorry, guys, with science, it's a little bit different. Sorry, look, quantum physics, which is generally recognized as with capitalized T, the science today. Sorry, but I will try to, when we will have a conversation with Smolin, this, isn't it that concerning determinacy and entanglement and Big Bang and whatever, almost all logically possible versions, solutions, are advocated by today's scientists, who are then in strict disagreement with each other, no? Like the one with whom I first spoke to you, Sean Carroll, no? He is basically, although he's a little bit more careful, his basic stance is multiverse, no? Simply, there is no collapse because all superpositions are actualized. Then I noticed now how the notion of observation, collapse of digital superpositions into one reality through observation. But at what level does observation occur? And I found with different authors almost all possible solutions. Like at one extreme, I like extremes, that's not a criticism, is Carlo Rovelli, who, and I support him here, who tries to avoid this conclusion, observation means a conscious mind, and no, to reading quantum physics in this idealist, even mystical one. No, isn't the point of quantum physics that if reality is collapsed, emerges as a reality that we know only through observation, doesn't this mean that the whole cosmos only exists if there is a big observer, let's say God, and so on? Rovelli tries to avoid this conclusion, and I think maybe a little bit too far, waters down, makes the notion of observation totally flat. For him, whenever elements interact in reality, they in some sense observe each other. You know, like every interaction means that one agent, let's say, who is a victim affected by the other, in this sense observes the other. Of course, the problem disappears here. But nonetheless, I don't think this totally flat, almost notion of observation is strong enough. I don't know where you would stand here. My fear is that you get rid of a problem in almost the same way symmetrically than Sean Carroll's multiverse solution. You know, like everything is observation. Everything that happens in reality is observation. On the other hand, you have, at least in some of his formulations, Roger Penrose, who is now even moving close to a position of accepting God, of some divine authority, a mega observer who guarantees the consistency of our entire cosmos, and so on and so on. So again, you need to see, they say, you philosophers, blah, 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 just each of you has his own theory. But wait a minute, if there is a crazy plurality of theories, again, it's in quantum physics today, you know, and it's science at its top. And my modest proposal here is that precisely we philosophers, and we may be of different orientations, but we who are trained in this Socratic tradition, we can be of some help, not in this totalitarian traditional Marxist sense that a quantum physicist will bring me his text and I will say, sorry, subjective idealism. No, not to judge, but to, whenever there is a mess in science, and today's quantum physics is one big mess, just to look at it from this Socratic standpoint, you know, and ask, but wait a minute, what do words mean for you? For example, that would be my question to Rovelli and to Roger Penrose. You know, because that's, again, I know, a big problem. For majority of quantum mechanics scientists, they try to avoid direct idealism, but they simply materialize observation in a machine of registration. They say a quantum phenomenon, the oscillations, superpositions, collapses when it's registered by a machine. Like electron is freely floating, it goes through all possible ways. If you measure it, it's only one way, This solution is, I think, also too simple, but again, what interests me so much is this multiplicity of versions, And maybe we philosophers can do something not in being brighter than them. I still have this, maybe it was felt when I almost when I spoke with Sean Kenner and Lee Smolin the first time, I simply respect them. Now, it will sound ridiculous what I will say now, but I think they are much brighter than me and so on. Who am I even to? But I think I can maybe not help them in this, pushing them in the right direction. What the hell do I know? But just, push them philosophically into, please clarify the points. Not so much clarify the points. There is still definition, but where some of us philosophers are good is pushing people, and Socrates, at least Plato's Socrates, was doing this all the time, pushing people into thinking upon or analyzing the implications and the consequences of what they advocate. Like, you are saying this, but are you aware what will be the consequences of this? That's always my question, not personally, I don't know him at him, but when Elon Musk went into that Neuralink, computers will be able to communicate directly with our brain. Okay, I'm too stupid to pass a scientific judgment. Is this possible or not? But my question is, if machines will be doing this, will we still be thinking? How will this affect our notion of communication? Let's say I think I already talked about this in one of previous podcasts with you. Let's say that you have direct access to my mind and I to your mind. In a way, it's, at least in today's state of things, it's a pretty horrifying perspective. Because I think the whole point of talking language is not to tell the truth, but to lie. I read, again, I'm old and senile, a wonderful today old means 10, 15 years ago, wonderful analysis of language, nothing to do with Lacan, Freud, or whatever. A simple positive behavior analysis which tries to reconstruct how language emerged. And the idea is, in a nice way, anti-Marxist, because Marx, or Engels on his behalf, he wrote that rather ridiculous short text, The Emergence of Man Through Work Out of Apes or whatever, all that stuff. There, the idea is that it's through collaboration, collective work, that language emerges. And Engels' theory is pretty stupid here. His idea is that he even uses at some point, or rather regresses to this tautological stupidity. He said that when productive process became too complex, it couldn't go on without language, because you had to signal to your coworker, do this, don't do that. So it's horrible, theoretically wrong saying of Engels. He says language was invented the moment people had something to tell to each other. Thanks, but to be in this position, you already have to be in language, my God, And here, and this is maybe even my pleasure. I'm not just doing with some abstract Lacanian, Hegelian speculation. I it almost gives me intellectual orgasm where I follow empirical research results, which then trigger an echo at the very abstract philosophical level. For example, the book that I mentioned, an author whose name I forgot, she claims quite convincingly that language originally was emerged in the process of seduction to lie, how to make an impression on your partner. And she even does it very intelligently, this guy, sorry, forgot his name, when he goes into sexual difference mating, and he says that among most of animals then we know, it's male members who put on masquerade, you know. Animals have colored nice feathers and so on to attract the woman. But then with humans, uniquely, it changes. It's the women, feminine sex, who has to mask themselves to attract men. Now I totally accept something third will emerge and so on. But I like much more this idea that language is not, as some Habermasians or modern rationalists think, originally a medium of communication, collaboration, thinking, which then gets distorted with all this sexualized or manipulative game. Note that language is, at its most basic dimension, an instrument of lying. And that to tell the truth, Hegel had somewhere this formula, you have to think in language against language. So what is, and still, please be careful when you listen to this, to what I found charming madness, namely how I run from elementary empirical examples to high speculation. I read now another book by Aaron Schuster on Kafka's stories, especially his story on Doc, his late tales on animals, Kafka, Doc who wants to be a philosopher, investigator. Okay, but my point is this one, that Aaron Schuster, Jacques Lacan, who I think it convinced me totally, who claims that language at its zero level, it's not this communication, exchange of information and so on. Animals already have that kind of language. For example, we all know bees, they know how to communicate. Like one bee, by flying in a certain way, can let other bees know, move here and then left, and you will encounter, I don't know, a big flower with a lot of potential honey or whatever and so on. No, it's not just communicating information. It's a wonderful idea that Kafka indicates somewhere, but others developed it, that the basic act of language is, sorry for the shock, is cursing, curse. Because curse is not, be very careful, cursing is not simply just a condensed way to humiliate you. Like, no, instead of arguing against you, I say, F off, up yours, you are whatever. No, you find hints of a much more wonderful notion that cursing always involves you. The basic dimension of cursing is not, I want to humiliate you. You curse when you are at a loss of proper words. Cursing emerges because ultimately we are in language, but we are also always alienated in language. We never succeed in fully saying what we want in language. So cursing basically means I'm confused, I don't know what to say, the proper word, I'm missing it. In this sense, Lacan, I think, has right that you, from this animal signaling, which can be very accurate, you enter proper human language when you add a curse. Because a curse means, sorry, but I don't recognize myself in my words. I cannot say what I want to say. This is the zero level of language. So you see, this is the reason I like these examples, is that, again, we have a very empirical phenomenon, cursing, but at the same time, we are at the in a high philosophical topic of what's the basic dimension of language? Why human language cannot be reduced to exchanging information? You know, cursing is this basic protest gesture of, I want to say something, but I fail again and again. I'm oppressed by language, but I'm also condemned to be in language. I cannot abandon language, because if I abandon language, I am nobody. I no longer exist. And based on these insights, I would even approach, again, all these questions about artificial intelligence, do machines think, and so on. For me, the measure would have been machines think if they can curse, if they can say, but not, of course, you can teach them, program them to curse. But if they can violate their own program by simply cursing and so on, cursing out of their own, as it were, subjectivity. You know, which is for me here, maybe I already mentioned it to you, I forgot, the nice moment. Mel Brooks, did I already mention to you his movie, this short history of humanity or whatever, where one episode, Mel Brooks, he plays a waiter who is in Jerusalem 33, it's a comedy, asked by some mysterious people, we have a very important dinner tonight. Could you come there and serve, you know? And then, okay, the guys goes there, it's Last Supper, of course, no. And there is a wonderful moment. He, carrying many plates, he slips down, not sleeping, sleep like, falls down, and of course, as the curse said, oh Christ. And you know what he hears? A gentle guy saying, yes, please, and so on. Here the movement goes into another dimension. She said it as, okay, not a curse, but like this exclamation of impotency. And what comes is somebody takes this as a personal address, as an act of communication, you know. This is why, again, I'm more and more convinced that without taking into account all these obscene examples and so on, we cannot really understand language. And language is getting so important today again. We will have to close slowly, so add another. In which direction are you thinking?
Yeah, well, let me just say first a note on the quantum mechanics material you brought up. It's sociologically quite fascinating and relevant to this conversation that most of these discussions about the foundations of quantum mechanics are happening in philosophy departments rather than physics departments.
Really? But on the other hand, Carroll, you know what amuses me? Yes, but that people, precisely the people who criticize philosophy as confused, but then they nonetheless get into this type of speculations. Because I know what you are saying. I'm following it closely, but okay, who would you say Carlo Rovelli is? Is he already half philosopher?
I would say that, like Lee Smolin, he's very much a trained physicist, but he takes the philosophical problems very seriously, which not a lot of physicists do. True,
but I still think that the mess of quantum mechanics today itself pushes people to, they are pushed into approaching things in a philosophical way. I don't think it's simply external to quantum mechanics, you know. This was the Copenhagen option, and now everybody is betraying Copenhagen. this pure stance, which is, we know what's the formula. Don't think, just calculator, whatever, I mean...
So Sean was he was most recently a research physicist at Caltech, but he's now in the philosophy department at Johns Hopkins.
Really? He also?
Yeah, in part, though, because he thinks that this mess we're in, particularly with regard to quantum gravity, requires untangling the foundations of physics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but again, I'm not against this philosophizing, because I think that, as a rule, this philosophizing moves in a correct Socratic way. Not we have all the answers in advance, we just have to discover them, but it's like this authentic perplexion, my God, what's happening? What do we mean by these terms? And so on. As I already developed, for example, apropos observation, or another big debate. Do you have positions here? Where would you, I will give a third degree to Lee next week. But for example, these wave superpositions, I'm here more towards a speculative but still materialist version. In what sense? Rovelli even goes into this, for me, a little bit too modest stance, which is that superpositions and so on, these are more epistemological phenomena. That when you say, for example, if an electron is to arrive from point A to point B, the highest probability is that he will take this path, but he may take many other paths. Sometimes Rovelli reduces this to an epistemological limitation, that superpositions don't have an ontological properly status, but they're simply an expression of the limitation of our knowledge, or also maybe indeterminacy in reality, but they are epistemological. Probability means, from my limited view, I can say this is the most probable way. But I'm here a little bit more speculative. Maybe it's just that I'm also here seduced by my philosophical spirit. I nonetheless like versions, and isn't this the whole point of all those double-slit experiments and so on, to prove that in some, it's not enough to say if there are many electrons, depending on observation and measurement, they can act like a wave or like particles. Isn't it that's the point they try to prove? Even if you do this experiment, particle after particle, still, if you don't observe it, you get a wave. If you observe it, you get particles. But what I want to say is that still, if you do it, the point is still that if you do it even with one particle after the other, they still behave as part of a way. And the conclusion that I like speculatively, I want to be beaten here by Lee, I don't know how he will reply, is that in some sense, even one particle takes all possible paths, virtually, in a superposition, not in reality. But this is the question that bothers me. Some of the quantum physicists are afraid to make the step that I'm tempted to make, that there simply is, not in a metaphysical sense, another reality, but another level of reality which doesn't behave in the way our time-space ordinary reality coordinates determine that we should behave. I follow here closely all the arguments. For example, Rovelli as a relationalist, he tries to reject the conclusion of all these Zeilinger and so on experiments that with entangled particles, that there is an instant communication or however you call it, interaction, faster than the speed of life. He, in his radical relationary stance, he claims that, no, to see this, that they are entangled, you would have to have one divine observer observing at the same time both. But you never had this. The observer has to be somewhere. He always gets the information with a delay and so on and so on. But again, you now, in a good sense, ruined my enjoyment a little bit. Because, I was so glad discovering how deep quantum physicists are in philosophical speculations, and then you told me basically, yes, but they are already doing philosophy in their own way, no? It's not this nice surprise that you see. Even the most radical empirical scientists are caught in this, But then, in that sense, what would have been my counter-argument to you? But didn't even Einstein and Bohr, in their crucial revolutions, they were not simply empirical scientific thinking. There was always a moment of properly philosophical thinking. Because, what Einstein did concerning time, space, relativity, blah, blah, passage from global general relativity. What he saw, and this is a philosophical insight, is that we have to change the meaning of what temporal distance means, temporality, time, space, and so on. You see, you don't just measure time. At the same time, you discover that you have to redefine what time is, what space is, and so on, And that's why I'm so passionate about it. But I'm silently resigned to the result that this all will not end well for me, in the sense that, I don't think I will make a mega breakthrough. I'm much more modest here. I just would like to. So can I ask you now to understand where things are? So can I ask you, in my obscene way, an extremely intimate question? I think you will refuse to answer. Don't be afraid, not about your sex life or what, but simply, where do you stand? Do you have a position, or you prefer, as it were, observer, you have debates, not to limit yourself too much? As a character, I would judge you don't want to clearly adopt one position. Or where do you stand in all these conflicts?
Yeah, my position is like a good tennis player, not to make unforced errors. So because I don't understand the physics well enough, I like to abstain from making judgments. But unlike you, I have this deep intuition, and intuitions are not worth very much, especially when you're as uninformed as I am.
Sometimes they are the best thing that happens.
Yeah, but that a lot of the issues you're pointing to are epistemological rather than ontological, as you put it.
Yes, but my point, the whole point of my effort, is to show how what may appear an epistemological issue really is ontological. That this is, if you want what I'm looking in quantum physics, if you want it in one sentence, is that what appears an epistemological limitation is already an ontological feature of the thing itself. Isn't this the whole point of superpositions, indeterminacy, and so on? That it's not just epistemological. Contingency, that it's in the thing itself. But now, that's why I look forward also to the debate with Sabine Hossenfelder, because I know that she is the superdeterminist, But it's a nice idea, but then at least I followed some debates with her when you push her closer at what she means by superdeterminism, it gets a little bit unclear to me.
Well, one question, though, that I would like to finish with is, I mean, analytic philosophers think of philosophy as much more continuous with science or informed by formal logic, while continental philosophers are influenced by literary traditions or psychoanalysis or Marxism, which, since you mentioned Popper earlier, many analytic philosophers have been hostile to. So I just wanted to be more clear on what characterizes this philosophical approach to reality that you have in mind. Is it just this Socratic method that unites them? But if that's the case, then where do they diverge?
For me, no, I'm not saying we should all just become Socratics and so on, the Socratic approach would have been here very modest, but at the same time crucial. It would have been simply, first, I'm a pessimist. When we have this opposition of vaguely Continental philosophy and Analytic philosophy, I think that each of them, as a rule, if we generalize it into two simple positions, Continental, Analytic, has usually a very raw, wrong, simplifying image of its opponent. Like if you read some analytic philosophers, then guys like Hegel and Heidegger are confused idiots, And I also admit, more than willingly, if you read some people high in hermeneutic tradition, they don't see the extraordinary finesse of much of analytic philosophy. I mean, there are incredible things happening there, but even in analytic philosophy, you mentioned Popper, no? But then, I don't follow them totally, but then I like guys like Thomas Kuhn and so on, who kind of tried to reject maybe, it's too strong a word, the Popperian tradition from within the very analytic space. First, empirically, claiming, and I love this, proves that science doesn't progress in this simple way of, hypothesis is falsified and so on. No, it's much more complex. Even I read a wonderful analysis of, still in first stage of relativity. Do you know that it's not as simple as that Einstein had the right intuition, and then it was only empirically confirmed by some, I don't know, star, moonlight, and so on. It's that many, at least at that stage of experimenting, many empirical results spoke against Einstein. And it was his greatness that you said, F you. No, there must be something wrong. I love this when scientists get a little bit arrogant and say, almost in a Hegelian way, when Hegel says, if facts don't fit theory, so much worse for the facts, Sometimes good scientists do this. At a certain point, Einstein there said this. He said, okay, if your measurements don't fit my theory, so much worse for your measurements. There must be something wrong in your measurements, And I think that big progresses in science happens in this way. It's not simply you get contrary data and then you say, oh my God, it's too much. Let's change the frame and so on. It's a more complex development, no?
Well, this is another place where philosophy is so important, because you mentioned that science does not always progress with hypothesis, falsify, and so on. The issues that we've been discussing are precisely some of these areas. You can't really test whether there are multiple branches in the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics because they're causally disconnected from us. Or even with string theory and loop quantum gravity, I mean, in the regimes where quantum gravitational phenomena are salient, we have no way of generating enough energy to run experiments. So we need to evaluate the situation philosophically.
It's wonderful what you said now, because for me, the strongest from the scientific point even, criticism, I don't know if it's true, maybe you know more, of string theory, is that it's not only that we cannot yet measure and confirm it experimentally. It's that with our present knowledge, it's even difficult. Some scientists try, I know, but nonetheless, it's even difficult to imagine experiments that would do it. It's very difficult. So again, here I am a little bit of a naive empiricist and saying, is it now, Sean Carroll wouldn't like what I will say now, but is it worth the price to go into multiverse? Like, it's so counterintuitive, the price. You want to be an empirical scientist, but you are doing what even the most crazy philosophers wouldn't be doing. You invoke an endless multiplicity of worlds with whom you will never interact, and so on,
Well, it's funny you say that because...
Where is your empiricism here?
It's just funny you say that because David Lewis, one of the most important analytic philosophers of the last 100 years, did exactly this. He thinks that he thought that there are all of these possible worlds out there, and they're really concrete. They're just not spatiotemporally or causally connected to ours. So the craziest philosophers, I guess, did believe in that.
Yeah, it was pleasure, but sorry, I'm getting tired. But
absolutely,
you, again,
Slavoj, as ever, this is terrific.
If all of this is worth, and if yes, please remember, Comrade Stalin, you are for me.
Yes. As ever, Slavoj, this was terrific. Thank you so much.
No, but I enjoy it so much because you know why? You are not as innocent as you claim to be.